You know, I've been watching this scandal. This scandal now, this sex scandal, unlike anything I've ever seen. And just before the camera was going to come on, I thought, I don't want to talk about this the same way everybody else is talking about it. I actually see almost everything from, let's call it a spiritual perspective. I try to look at things a little differently. I'm not really a political person. I mean, I'm fascinated by politics because politics is human nature writ large. And that's what makes me so fascinated with it. And it's history and it's all these things unfolding. But I always see it in a kind of different way. Let me just put this, let me just talk for a minute about religion. Let me talk about Jesus. We're going to talk Jesus. We're going to talk Jesus. You know, when I read the Gospels, I see something in them. I don't think I'm the first person to ever see this in them, but it's not the usual thing. It's not the usual religion, be nice instead of not being nice, do good instead of not being good, don't sleep with this person. I don't actually think that God had to come to earth and die to let us know that we should treat each other nicely. We know that we should treat each other nicely. When I read the Gospels, what I see is a man who is the incarnation of God and who therefore has the consciousness of eternity speaking to us who only have the consciousness of time. And there's all these conversations in the Gospels where Jesus is trying to explain to us that eternity, if you live in eternity in your mind, the world looks a lot different. You don't have to worry about things. You can forgive sins because in eternity, every sin becomes tiny, right? In time, the sin is enormous. But in eternity, it can be forgiven. And you can, you know, he's basically giving you instructions on how to get your mind into eternity. Love your neighbor, love God, forgive. All these things he's telling you are ways to get a mindset, an eternal mindset. And when you can hear Jesus kind of talking to these people, it's almost like he doesn't quite understand us at first. He says things like, you know, Peter tries to walk on the water like Jesus does, and Peter takes a couple of steps and then he sinks, and Jesus says, "Oh, ye of little faith." You think like, really? How much faith do you have to get even 2 steps on the water? You know, I mean, I couldn't take 2 steps on the water. But what Jesus is learning, I think, is he's seeing that we don't have that eternal perspective. In the eternal perspective, the mind is the thing, the consciousness is the thing that dominates, and physical reality like illness just vanishes. It's just, that's how Jesus is constantly healing. Why he's healing? He's showing you that in the eternal perspective, you know, it really, these physical things that we worry so much about don't have as much weight. And that's the whole thing about forgiveness, is you can forgive. You know, the great mystic poet William Blake wrote a line where I'm quoting it from memory, but it's something like, "All throughout eternity, I forgive you and you forgive me." Great line, great couplet of poetry. But in time, no sin goes away. And this is the frustration we have, for instance, that white people sometimes have with black people, right? In time, in history, every sin, every evil bends the arc of history so that it goes in a certain way. And in order to forgive those sins and rise above them, you have to have an eternal mindset. And so each person is an eternal thing. But a society is not. A society lives in time. But each person is an eternal thing. So when blacks say, "Oh, you know, you white folks held slaves," and we say, like, I never had a slave. You know, what are you talking about? You know, my Jews were slaves. How do you like them apples? You know, I mean, so because we're saying that because in eternity we're innocent. Each person is innocent. In time, the arc of society was bent by that evil. It just was. And it was bent by Jim Crow, and it was bent by those things. And in order to lift above it, somebody has to forgive. Somebody has to lift into eternity.